All right, we're ready. Go ahead, Pat.
Good. Okay, we'll let people in. I'll start talking and
Yes.
start in a minute here.
Okay.
Well, good snowy afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the February virtual monthly luncheon of the Covington Business Council. I'm CBC Executive Director Pat Frew. We want to thank our title sponsor today for the 2021 campaign, St. Elizabeth Healthcare. St. Elizabeth Edgewood has just been named one of America's 250 best hospitals for 2021 by Health Grades. Hospitals that receive this award are within the top 5% in the nation for consistently delivering clinical quality. St. Elizabeth Edgewood is one of only 3 hospitals in the Commonwealth to be recognized with this award. And St. Elizabeth Healthcare operates 6 facilities and more than 160 primary care and specialty office locations throughout Northern Kentucky, Southeast Indiana, and Greater Cincinnati. Sponsored by the Diocese of Covington and a member of the Mayo Clinic Care Network, St. Elizabeth is a mission-based organization committed to improving the health of the communities they serve, providing more than $100 million in uncompensated care and benefit to the community each year. I also want to thank all of our CBC board members in attendance today, including our new board chair, Tom Tilmas of Republic Bank. Thanks to all of our board members for doing a great job and supporting the work and mission of the CBC, providing access, opportunity, and growth to our members and to the community. Now, a few of our upcoming events. Next Tuesday, we'll have our quarterly nonprofit Lunch and Learn presented by Von Lehman, talking about special events, especially in light of the virtual world we've been living in for the last year now. A 3-person panel that will have good advice for our nonprofits will be dispensing all their great knowledge. So we hope you will join us next Tuesday from noon to 1. CBC Connects is every Wednesday. We've been averaging 24 small businesses sitting in every week. It's a great way to learn what's going on in the community and meet with like-minded people. Don't forget, we have a sponsorship opportunity with Connects. It's a great value for the price, being a sponsor for those 50-some meetings every year. Speak with Christine or I if you have any interest in learning more about that. Now is the time we normally hear from Tom West, Covington Economic Development Director, about what's new in the city in terms of new businesses coming onto the scene. Now, Tom was unable to join us today. Something about a flimsy excuse that he had a chance to get the first dose of this vaccine. I don't know what it is, but you know, the work ethic of today's youth. But I'm certainly no Tom West, but here are a few things you should know about the work of Tom's department. They do have a dedicated person helping companies find buildings for lease or sale if they're interested in locating their business in Covington. That person is Susan Smith, their business attraction officer. Susan can also help connect owners of commercial properties to such businesses. So contact me if you want to reach Susan. And by the way, did you also know that the city has a regular monthly newsletter talking about available properties? We can help get that delivered to your email box every month if you reach out to me as well. Also, you should know that the city continues to offer incentives for businesses in the categories of rent subsidies, facade improvements, upper floor rehabilitation, and job growth. And I'd be glad to put you in touch with the right people with the city if you like. So that concludes our growth report from the city this week. And now on to our program. Mark Policinski is celebrating his 30th year as a CEO, the past 19 years with the Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana Regional Council of Governments, also known as OKI. OKI is responsible for doling out millions of federal dollars annually, 40 million here last year, in surface transportation projects. Prior to OKI, Mark held senior level positions in the private sector, including CEO of the Brown Publishing Company and Vice President of the CoStar Group. Before moving to Cincinnati, Mark worked in Washington, D.C. as a senior economist for the Joint Economic Committee on Capitol Hill and as the Associate Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Department of Commerce under President Ronald Reagan. For the past 18 years, Mark has been named as one of the 100 most powerful leaders in the Cincinnati region. Yet, I can tell you, despite his considerable leadership skills and knowledge, he is equally self-effacing, filled with humility, and is a true regional advocate. I'm happy to call him a friend, not only to me, but to the CBC as well. And Mark is here today to talk about how transportation technology will change our lives significantly over the next decade. As always, Mark, welcome to the CBC. We look forward to your great comments today.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
All great.
All right. Well, that's quite an introduction, Pat. You know, I swear about 60% of it was true, and I thank you for saying 100% of it, though. That's really cool. It's always a pleasure and an honor to be with CBC. It's a pleasure because of the great people that are at the CBC, including yourself, Pat. It's an honor because of your success. If you look around this region, there is no way that you can in any way ignore what's going on in Covington. It is one of the great success stories of this region. The building and the involving of the community, it's really remarkable. And CBC has a role to play in that and has played a role in it. And so I thank you for the opportunity. This is great. I want to talk to you all today about the dramatic changes that are coming about in transportation technology. And more to the point, how this technology is going to affect your life. And it's going to do it to you sooner than you think. I'm going to just talk about one aspect of transportation technology, and that's driverless cars. There's all other kinds of technology in transportation, such as drones, that's really remarkable, but just kind of narrow the focus. I want to just concentrate on driverless cars, which are also called autonomous cars or AVs. I think many of you have probably heard about driverless cars or autonomous vehicles, but let me ask you this question. How old do you think that technology is? Do you think that technology is like 10 years old, 15 years old? In truth, it's about 30 years old. And so it's kind of a strange thing, but driverless cars are kind of becoming old news. That may sound funny to say that something that isn't totally here is old news, but it's true. So now I'm going to go into PowerPoint mode with my good friend, Jim Pickering, and we're going to slice and dice. There you go. All good. Okay, can you see it? I think it's all good. All right.
Yes. You're great, Mark.
Thank you very much. Driverless cars. Okay, they're no longer the imagination of science fiction writers. They're not just in blueprints, they're not in pilot programs. Driverless cars have been on our streets and on our highways for a long time. You have to also remember that all the cars being built today and all the cars being built in the future will become more and more and more automated and increasingly connected to each other, other vehicles, as well as their physical surroundings. The technological revolution that's taking place in transportation is really a revolution in mobility. And this upheaval will transform our very concept of time as well as mobility. Cars will be computers that drive us. Traffic lights and gas-powered engines are going to be only found in museums, and the places where we live and where we work are going to be altered forever. The technology is here, the investment is here, and the need is here. Let me start with the technology. In the year 2009, there was only one lone driverless pilot program going on in America, and that was on a desolate road in Arizona. Today, there are 50 companies building driverless cars around the country. They're forming strategic partnerships that are involving each other, which bring about economies of scale, shortening developmental time, and they bring products to the market faster. Fleets of autonomous vehicles are moving goods and customers on public roads. Autonomous trucks have been driving a 1,000-mile journey between Arizona and Texas over the mountains and over the deserts for years. When it comes to driverless cars trying to navigate city streets with pedestrians and road work, traffic lights, and so forth, the examples become even more powerful. Waymo is the name of Google's driverless car. It just reached driving 20 million miles on city roads without a major incident. 600 Waymo self-driving vehicles drive 25,000 miles each day on public roads in Phoenix. Lyft has just completed its 100,000th driverless taxi trip in Las Vegas. Honda and General Motors have a new partnership to deploy a driverless taxi fleet in major cities in this year. These are historic partnerships and advancements, and now we are poised to take the next step in autonomous driving, and that one in which the controls of the human operation of a car are entirely absent. No brake, no gas pedal, no steering wheel. The technology is here and the investment is here. The AV industry is attracting investment that the world has never seen. It took 19 years from year 2000 to year 2018 for this industry to attract $1 trillion worth of investment. The next $1 trillion will be invested between 2019 and next year. This investment is occurring at the same time that the cost of technology is dropping and the output of the technology is remarkably advancing. The current cost of making a car totally autonomous is between $70,000 and $200,000. Industry analysts, however, say that that cost could go down to $5,000 per vehicle in as little as 5 years. In simple terms, a driverless car is made up of two components: a LiDAR unit, which sits on top of the car. It's a combination of laser and radar, and it emits millions of pulses of laser per second. That's data. That data is then sent to the supercomputer, which translates the data and tells the car how to drive. That LiDAR unit in 2012 cost $70,000. Today, there are two dozen companies in the world that are manufacturing these LiDAR units for less than $100. A supercomputer in the year 2000 could drive a car without a driver. It was 1,600 square feet, that supercomputer was. It cost $46 million to build, and its output was 1 teraflop. A teraflop is the ability to process 1 trillion bits of information per second. Well, today, that supercomputer that drives the driverless car is not 1,600 square feet. It's the size of a shoebox. It doesn't cost $46 million. It costs about $58 to build. And its output is 2.3 teraflops. These dramatic shifts in technology's cost curves bring new investment, which spurs technology faster, which does what? It brings more investment. ARC Investment Management, it's a New York firm that concentrates solely on disruptive innovation, says that by the year 2030, that's 9 years from now, this industry will be $4 trillion. To give you some concept of what that is larger than the current global energy sector in this world today. So we have the technology, we have the investments, and now we have to get to the question of, is the need here? There are two critical questions when it comes to need. The first one is obviously, will the public want to be driven by a driverless car? This important question will be answered with a resounding yes, because the benefits of this technology are too great for a society to ignore. The potential benefits truly are amazing: saving lives, reducing crashes to zero, reducing congestion by 50%. Fossil consumption will go to zero, and there'll be a dramatic improvement in our air quality. For the first time in history, everyone will be mobile. And that means the disabled, the elderly, and those people who are of low income, are underserved populations. It will improve their access to jobs, to education, and to healthcare. But the biggest reason why people will say yes to this technology is safety. You know, it's kind of interesting. People may not think that these cars are safe, but that will be the reason that people will adopt this technology. And it's very simple. 94% of all the traffic accidents are caused by driver error. 1.3 million people lose their lives worldwide due to traffic accidents. In this country, 40,000 people lose their lives due to traffic accidents. Now, to put that American number in perspective, that's the equivalent of a Boeing 737 falling out of the sky and crashing every week for 52 consecutive weeks. Let me ask you this question. If the American public knew that there was a technology that prevented weekly airplane crashes, they would want that technology, they would demand that that technology be employed. And that is exactly what is happening with this technology in the future. Driverless cars will remove the most fallible part of the equation, the driver. AVs, driverless cars, don't get tired, they don't get distracted, they don't text, and you surely don't drive drunk. Now, speaking of human drivers, here's one example of just how bad we are at it. We all encounter traffic congestion in commuting, and we've all built this into kind of our daily lives. The scene here is all too familiar. We sit in traffic, which we attribute to construction or an accident or inadequate infrastructure. But as this demonstration shows, the problem is on this Zoom. It's you and me. The 22 drivers in the scenario were asked to maintain 19 miles an hour speed around this loop. As you can see, it takes just one driver's slight change in speed to cause an issue. The driver behind it slows down further, and the one behind it slows down even more. This backup effect, if you will, reverberates around the loop, resulting in a full-fledged traffic jam, the only cause of which is a difference in human behavior and reaction. Besides safety, the change that will drive people to say yes to this technology is what I call found time. The AAA estimates that every year Americans will spend 290 hours behind the wheel of a car. That's the equivalent of 7 full work weeks. Driverless cars could free up 250 million hours of commuting time. Right now, driving is lost time. But what would you do if you got those hours back with your found time? Would you learn a new language? Would you read to your child? Would you catch up on your sleep? Would you and your business partners find and design a new process to end world hunger? If a person can sleep, video conference, and plan while commuting, commuting is no longer lost time, it's found time. So I think one of the issues that always goes through our minds when we talk about this is how quickly is this all going to happen? Well, nobody knows exactly for sure when driverless cars will become dominant on our roadways. However, here's a little anecdotal evidence. 5 years ago, I brought OKI together and said, folks, there's only one game in town, and that's technology. What's going on in technology and transportation is so dramatic. This is how we have to change our agency. This has to be our focus. Well, when we got involved with this technology and we talked to the experts in it, their view was that by 2050, that's about the time when driverless cars would start to have a major, major impact on our society. Now, 5 years later, when you talk to those experts, it's no longer 2050, it's 2030. The timeline has moved forward 20 years in almost a matter of months because of the power of this technology. That said, there's an equation to how fast driverless cars will arrive on the scene, and it comes down to 2 conditions. First, people must be willing to get in a driverless car. As I said, they're very safe. They've shown millions of miles of driving to be safe, but yet 7 in 10 Americans when questioned now don't feel safe getting in a driverless car. But the more and more people learn about this technology, the power, the lives it can save, the aid it can give to clean air, the help it can give to poor, the elderly, the infirm, Americans will want this technology and they will get in a car. But the most important aspect, if you want to see all these positive things come about because of driverless cars, one other thing has to happen. And that is that people must be willing to share their rides with strangers. 75% of Americans drive to work alone. Americans believe that we are people who deserve life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and we want to drive in our cars alone. Thank you very much. 75% of us, as I said, drive to work alone. How about the trips you make on the weekend to do your chores? How many of those are shared with people? Very few. Analysts say that if we adopt this type of AV technology into our society, congestion will fall by 50%. If you want to know what that looks like, you don't have to imagine it. All you have to do is to remember what the roads were like in the beginning of March of 2020, when traffic was 50% down due to the COVID virus. So the whole point is that we only get these positive benefits if people get in those cars and they'll be willing to share the rides. If we don't do that, we don't get rid of any more cars, we'll still have tons of parking lots and parking garages, and we'll have a lot of the societal melodies that affect us today. You know, there are going to be a lot of investments, there are going to be a lot of technological outcomes, there are going to be a lot of regulations and policies that are going to shape how this enters the marketplace. But there are two things that we know for a fact. One, the technology of transportation is going to change our lives. It's not just going to change our commutes. The technology is also advancing at rates never thought possible even a few years ago. The technology is here, it's accelerating, and the world has never seen anything about it. And talking about this technology, it's kind of fun to think about practical things that occur in your life and what will happen to them. Like, will we still own cars? Will individuals still own cars? I mean, literally, if you can get up every morning and apply a Super Uber app, which guarantees that in 4 minutes, a driverless car will take you anywhere at any time, why would you want to own a car? Shared rides obviously offer the biggest benefit, but will Americans give up this absolute God-given right that we want to drive in our cars alone? It's an amazing thing because the answer to that question will determine the density of residential and commercial development, not just in our cities, but our suburbs, even in our rural areas. What happens to the typical home if we don't need a car? What happens to the garage? Do new homes have garages? What happens to the cost of the home if there's no garage? What do we do with all the garages we already have? What are we going to put in there? How will cities and suburbs and uber suburbs and even rural areas, how will they be fixed and transfixed, I should say, if people literally can live 70 miles from where they work and get there faster than they do today if they were only living 10 miles away? As I said before, what's the future of parking lots and parking garages? If you look at the Florence Mall or the Kenwood Mall or large office complexes, the footprint of the parking garage and the parking lot is as big or bigger than the complex itself. What happens if all that goes away? What goes in its place? What's the future of gas stations? Because one thing I didn't mention, all autonomous vehicles, every one of them that's been built, is being built, or will be built, are always electric or hydrogen powered. If you want to get really crazy about this stuff, none of them are going to be gas powered. What happens to gas stations? What happens to the fossil fuel industry? I think one of the biggest things we are concerned about when we think about technology is what's the impact on our economy? More importantly, more direct, what's the impact on our workforce? Many transportation jobs with this introduction of technology could be automated. At the same time, we all have to remember that 1 million computer programming jobs were unfilled last year. 2.4 million STEM jobs will be unfilled this year. These are the very academic disciplines that the AV jobs of the future will need to build on. So, as has been true throughout the history of capitalism and technological advancements normally always yields more jobs, not fewer jobs. So let me be clear in closing. These changes are going to happen. We don't know exactly when, but it's coming. The technology is too advanced, it's too powerful, it's getting too much better, if there is such a term, for it to stop, and it's going to continue to develop. This is going to, I think, lead to a vastly different society that helps people who are really, really on the outside of mobility right now. So that's why we're optimistic at OKI about the future of transportation. It's a revolution that puts people before cars, it boosts our quality of life, and it includes everybody. Every day at OKI, we're trying to incorporate this technology into our transportation work. We're relentless in trying to make this a smart region that's defined by intelligent mobility and intelligent infrastructure. So we're happy about where we're going. We hope you will be too. And of course, now I'm going to answer any questions that you might have.
Great, Mark. We have a couple of questions already, and let me get into this. And
are they easy ones?
Yeah. Mike Wallace type. You'll love them. And I want to remind people, if you want to bring forward any additional questions, put them in the chat box, and we'll read them aloud to Mark. But one is, we've talked for years in our region about light rail and things like that. I would imagine that with autonomous vehicles, it's going to totally change the ideas of, why would we need some of these things that previously were designed to help, to bring us into the 21st century, reduce congestion and all that. So talk a little bit about some of those things that we looked at as advances before that are kind of being lapped, if you will, by this new technology of autonomous vehicles.
Well, I think that's a great question. And it was one of the first questions we encountered when we went to our first conference on AVs 5 years ago now. The short answer is it's going to have a dramatic impact on light rail systems. I think to this extent, cities, regions that already have rail, it's going to stay. It's not going to go away. But for a new region, a new city, to try to put in a light rail system that competes with a technology that, responds to a person's life very easily. In other words, you get up in the morning, you hit the Super Uber app, 4 minutes, the car's there, you go downtown, they drop you off, you get done with work, again, coming back, same thing. So yeah, I think that the technology really is advancing in a way that helps people more directly in their lives than light rail. The other thing about light rail is it's not getting any less expensive. It's extraordinarily expensive to build. And so that's why I say if a community doesn't have light rail or a dedication to rail, like a Chicago, New York, or whatever, I don't think those communities are going to invest in light rail. It's kind of an interesting residual of the technological advancement that the booming technology of 15 years ago, light rail, might be obsolete when it comes to building into new communities.
Mm-hmm. Great. Mark, one of the questions from James here, with autonomous vehicles opening the door for a push for more productive hours in the day, how can businesses set boundaries to ensure that they're protecting a healthy work-life balance for employees? Well,
I think the thought is that if you are spending an hour and a half less in your car every day, you could actually work, but you could also sleep. It's interesting, but there have been some studies done, and I don't mean to put these out as fact, but people with this found time, they tend to relax. They do not work. They tend to do other things. And if you think about it, because of what we have on our phones, we can talk to anybody in the world, So I think in a way it might improve work-life balance, but again, that's going to be up to the individual and, companies. If you're wise, I think everybody's should be already moving to this, but you want to protect that balance. And I don't see how this technology necessarily determines that it's going to be harmed. It could be, in fact, made better.
Okay. Again, a reminder, and we're getting some questions submitted by the chat box, so please continue to do that. Tammy wants to know how the insurance industry is weighing in on driverless vehicles, Mark, in favor or against, and how will it impact their industry?
was talking to a buddy of mine who, and I said, you know, how's your contact going with the insurance industry on this stuff? And he goes, well, they're scared blank. He said, because the idea, of course, is that we won't need car insurance. However, you have to understand this other thing, and who knows how this is going to even out or not even out. But all of those driverless cars, they're going to be in fleets, and they're going to be owned by somebody. And those cars will have to be insured. Of course, the interesting question becomes, what happens if two driverless cars do in fact get in an accident? Whose fault is it? Is it the car's fault? Is it the technology's fault? Is it the software's fault? Is it the hardware? Who bears that responsibility? But I've not talked to one person who's ever said anything other than, when this stuff hits, the insurance industry is going to be absolutely turned upside down.
Yeah. John Peel sticker, always the comedian here. I did not write this question. What will happen first? Will I ride in an AV, or will we get a new Brent Spence bridge?
Next question.
Well, let's talk about, I mean, one of my questions for you, Mark, was going to be, you know, the Mark Twain comment, and, you know, I want to be in Cincinnati because everything happens 10 years later. What are you hearing from people in our region in terms of, you know, being early adopters in this? And what is your hope? Because it sounds like most of this is happening out west. The adoption is more easily seen out there, you know, maybe because we get more desolate stretches of road, different things like that, and just maybe the way people think in different parts of the country. But how soon do you hope that this will be more embraced? We haven't heard a lot of that here in our region, that people are embracing this yet, or maybe I haven't been listening to the right people. I don't know.
Pat, you always listen to the right people, and right people always listen to you. The point, the couple of things. One, when it comes to driverless trucks, that is going to occur in open spaces, whether it be out west or in the southeast or Midwest or whatever, because it lends itself to that business model. Second, no region in this country is on the cutting edge of this stuff, okay? Nobody's like booming out there first. Phoenix, I was quoting those things from Phoenix because Google made a decision 15 years ago that that's where they were going to have their test bed, okay? So maybe that's why it's ahead. But when it comes to this region, do not underplay our significance. If you look at what's happening at CVG, okay, all the growth that's booming out there, they need technological solutions that are built around things like driverless cars and drones and vertical takeoff and landing vehicles. So this technology has, in my view, and we work with CVG a lot, in my view, CVG presents a perfect laboratory for these technologies. It will involve driverless vehicles, maybe shuttles, how to get people around the campus once you get there. I mean, CVG is a large place. If you arrive and you're in the southeast corner and your job is at northwest corner, you've got a 35-minute walk. Well, you're going to have ways to move people once they get to the airport around, workers moving around. Also, driverless vehicles, how do we get people to the airport? Will we be able to adopt some transit system that uses driverless vehicles and the such? So I am of the belief that CVG, and we're working a lot with UC research in these areas, that this is a perfect laboratory for these types of technology. And I'll tell you this, CVG is not lacking for suitors trying to come to CVG with business deals involving technologies like this when it comes to transportation mobility.
So if you had to predict 10 years from now, Mark, what it sounds like it will start from a commercial standpoint and then grow to maybe more personal use. Where do you think our region will be in 10 years? You know, say it's 2031. Will we start by then? Will we be well into this, both from a commercial as well as a personal use of autonomous vehicles, do you think?
I think you put your finger right on it, Pat. I think the first adoption of this is going to be commercial. but it's going to be widespread. But how quickly it moves into the personal realm and what about 10 years, I'm always reminded about the smartphone. When the smartphone first came out, they cost $1,000 and everybody had a flip phone. And they said, why in the world would I need a smartphone and spend $1,000? Well, the adoption of the smartphone technology was one of the quickest technology advancements ever made. So when it comes to how quickly technology moves, it's not so much a question of the technology, it's the demand by the people. That's what makes it all work. And I think that as the story is told more and more and more about how safe these vehicles are, as distracted driving, texting while driving, more and more people see how unsafe that is. I think that these things can come together in a cultural as well as a scientific realm. And so that we'll see this adopted sooner rather than later. I'll tell you right now, I truly believe in 2031, many of us will be driving in driverless vehicles for our own personal use. I don't know if that's 55% or 15%, but it's coming too fast, and we all benefit from it.
Great. Still more time for questions from the chat box. We have a few more. Katie wants to know, is there any regulatory pushback on autonomous vehicles? And what would a path be to get these vehicles on the road, state versus federal guidelines?
That's a great question. Because every time you start talking about, moving forward, you always have to worry about government holding you back. But here we're talking about safety. So government has this very large role to play. I'm not sure that I'm not sure that I'm the expert on this, but what I've been told, and as I talk to people, government has kind of played this right. They've said to the industry, go forth and develop this technology. And as it starts to build, we are starting to build regulation and rules and things like that. So hopefully there'll be this grand intertwining of the technological advancement occurring and government saying, and this isn't just government, by the way, government sits with the private sector right now, trying to figure out standards, trying to figure out how this all works. So it's a great question. Hopefully government will get it right for once, and that, they'll understand that this technology has a great benefit to our society, particularly those people in most need of things like jobs and healthcare and mobility.
Great. Another question, this from Steve. If autonomous driving is coming by 2030, the drop in traffic congestion presented ought to obviate the need for more bridges and highways. If new bridges and roads built in the interim need 30 plus years of financing to pay back, how could proposed projects be financed to pay off these kinds of investments? Yeah, let's talk about the traditional bridges and infrastructure.
Yeah, well, it's a great question because if we do get this drop in congestion, then the issue becomes, do we need more roads? Well, probably not. But what do we do with that money then? That money needs to go back into roads to make them technologically advanced. So the maintenance becomes more than just filling potholes. It's how do you light them up to this degree. It's not that far away. As a matter of fact, the technology is here, and I think it's already being implemented, where an electric car drives on a road and is charging itself because the road is taking in solar power, and then it yields it up to the car. Now, obviously, there are 1,000 different things that have to work and be advanced for that to happen, but that's what we're talking about. So the investment that would go into new roads is, I think, still going to probably go into roads and make them technologically advanced. And also, you have to understand that it's not just cars talking to each other, it's cars talking to infrastructure. So all the infrastructure in the country is going to have to be lit up so that it can communicate with these cars that are moving around without drivers in them.
Yeah, and we talk about gas taxes and things like that. I mean, is it conceivable that government could get involved in helping to fund autonomous vehicles? Are there any models for that, Mark?
Well, I don't think it's particularly the role of the government to try to be at the forefront of technology. I think the proper role is for technology to run wild. And then when it starts to have an impact, when it comes out of the laboratory, when the science is more applied, at the same time that that's occurring iteratively, government regulation should be growing and coming online. So again, so that there's intertwining, so that when it is available to the public, they're safe. And that's what it comes down to. These regulations, they have to make us safe. And I think it'll work. Does the government invest in this technology? Absolutely. But it's not at the forefront. It's not one of those 50 companies building, autonomous cars and hundreds of companies supplying the hardware and software.
Great. A question from Kevin. How will this technology affect the freight industry? Will we see driverless trucks deliver large amounts of freight in our region and elsewhere?
Yes, it will. And that, I think, my view is it'll be the first application will be in freight. Just the way this could possibly work, and this is not, this is not gospel, but the way it could work is, let's say you have goods here in Cincinnati and you need to get them to San Francisco. No, not San Francisco, Las Vegas. You would take the load and you have a driver and you would go through the streets of this region and you'd go, let's say, one of the outer reaches of the region, let's say Harrison, Ohio, and you would take the load and you would transfer it to another bed. And that's where the driverless vehicle is. And that driverless vehicle would drive it all the way to Las Vegas to a similar kind of remote location, transfer the load to a car with a driver, and then they would drive it into the city. So the really short trip has a driver. Really long trip has no driver. As this technology goes on, in fact, the technology is already here, you can have a driverless car moving around the streets of any major city in this country, a driverless truck. But I just think that might be the iterative process is how we get there. But it will dramatically change the freight world.
Okay, last call on questions in the chat box, and this is our last question. We talked a few moments ago about gas tax paying for infrastructure projects. Pete, asked the question as we move towards AV, ride share, and e-vehicles, we would be buying less gasoline, and that would be less tax money to finance road projects. How does that play out? What will the new funding method be there, Mark? Any thoughts, suggestions on that?
Well, I'm afraid to say who we're going to tax. That's how you get in trouble. The tax tax, if the gas tax goes away, then obviously we have to find a new source. My thought is, and I've always believed this, the federal government has to reprioritize transportation. It's kind of an afterthought right now. It's one of those nice things we talk about when we run for re-election. But the government is going to have to say, transportation ties us to the global economy. There's never been a greater need for us to be at the top of our game when it comes to transportation infrastructure, transportation technology. So government is going to have to, in a sense, say, we are going to, instead of the gas tax, we're going to have to prioritize out of the budget, take it from wherever you want, and we're going to have to build those roads to make them more technologically smart. We have to build those bridges to make them safer, because God knows we need safe bridges. But it's just going to take a reprioritization in the federal budget of transportation. We're going to lose the gas tax. I mean, we're losing it right now. We're going to lose it. And government has, 10 years to figure it out. Let's hope they can do it.
Okay, and then our last question comes from Corey here, and he's talking about the safety factor. Does the introduction and adoption of AV really need to be an all-in approach, meaning the majority of the public needs to buy in order for it to happen?
No, that's a great question. I don't think it has to. I think it will. I think people are going to see the benefits, and they're going to figure out they don't need to own a car. They don't need to have car insurance. They don't need to put gas. All these things are benefits, and it saves lives, and it cleans our air. And I think people are going to incorporate that. The other thing that kind of argues a little bit against that is that these cars nowadays, we have cars that park themselves. I can get on the highway and take my hands off the wheels, and my car will steer in between those lines. And that car is 6 years old. Think of 6 years from now what the technological advancements are going to be. So I think one of the issues is, how do we get to fully driverless cars? We're going to go through all these processes where the cars become more and more and more automated. So maybe it's not that big a jump to go to a driverless car when it comes to the fear factor, but maybe it's a huge jump when you say, why do I need a driverless car and share that ride when I've got basically the driverless car here? So it is a conundrum we'll have to figure out. And I leave you on a conundrum.
Okay, great questions today from our
They
audience.
were.
Mark, any parting thoughts just in summing things up?
Next time you invite me back, I want twice the salary you paid me to show up today.
And the comments will be twice as cogent and pointed, and, really show off your great intellect there, Mark. Thank you so much for your presentation today. Great job.
Thank you guys for everything you do.
Okay, super. And thank you, St. Elizabeth Healthcare, for being our title sponsor today. Join us next month, March 11th, when Covington City Manager David Johnston will tell us the latest on the Internal Revenue Site development. Again, March 11th, that's a week early because we have the NCAA tournament next week. And I was born at night, not last night, so I know not to schedule against the tournament, even during the pandemic period. So we'll be a week earlier next month, March 11th. We appreciate you joining us. Have a great weekend. Till next time, we are adjourned. Have a great day.